my light come on? Or it's recording? Good. All right, I've got all of Hebrews up on the website on YouTube, so you can get all of Hebrews, which is kind of fun. And the only one I was missing were the ones that were in the biology or chemistry lab because something was happening to my card. So sorry, but I think we only missed a few verses or a few parts there, but all 113 things are on there. We'll try to make 113 out of the Torah, but we're online. They're doubling down, so that's cool. I like that, or that's okay. Anyway, some people said they like the extra time. Some of this stuff is really complicated, and as you notice, the point of this is to look at the Torah, which is law. So I'm intentionally not hitting every single point of the Torah because we're looking at the Torah as law. So the most important part of the law is to look at the covenant. I did want to mention something that I looked up intentionally. Let me get to the right point for this. So we already described these words. We already described these words, and as you know, I'll just remind you. So berith is a cutting. This is the word for covenant in the Old Testament, in the Torah. So it means a cutting. And the reason is because there's always a sacrifice when you have a covenant. Eretz is firm. That means that's the word that's used for the land. There is no word for world in ancient Hebrew. Shana means to fold. This is the word for a year. And the reason I put this up is I did describe for you Yom and Elom. Yom and Elom. Yom means a period of time, and Elom means eternity. So the Hebrews don't have words for time the way we have words for time. And part of that problem is, what is a year? To them, a year is a folding. They don't have a word for month. A month is a lunar month, but it's also a mixed word. It's figurative, and that's part of their culture. Mitzvah is to slaughter. That is to sacrifice. And I went through the whole thing about slaughter. We'll talk more about slaughter and sacrifice as we go on, but the most important thing to remember is in ancient cultures, whenever you ate meat, the meat was slaughtered in a sacrifice. All meat that is slaughtered in sacrifice, which is one of the problems why today Orthodox Jews have a problem hunting. You know why? Yes?
I was going to ask about that, because I remember reading about hunting or killing an animal like out in the wild in Leviticus, when it tells, well, you have to pour the blood out on the ground and stuff. So apparently it was allowed.
It was. In fact, they were encouraged to do so. They could eat of any of these things.
So not necessarily all meat was sacrificed, right, if they went out hunting?
The meat, whenever you killed the animal, you had to make sure that it was dispatched and properly bled in a kosher manner. And so what's the problem today with Orthodox Judaism and hunting? It's the same problem. Okay, remember I told you, one of the big deals they get, and one of the things I mentioned about your tools, right? One of the arguments that people make about the Old Testament, the Torah, and the Tanakh is, you find, and we'll study this, in the Torah it says, who does the sacrifice? No, the person does, not the priest. But later on in Nehemiah and Ezra and Nehemiah, who does the sacrifice? The priest. And in Jesus' time, who does the sacrifice? The priest. According to Josephus, that started early, but the reason it did that is because of the same hunting issue. How do you know it was done properly? And the problem they had in the temple, and we'll get to this, is that when they went to the temple, and if the person glitched the sacrifice, what happened? The priest said, it's a hook. You can't eat that. You can't, it's not sacrifice. Go get another one. If you had raised that bullet all year to bring it as the tithe, yeah, some up to $5,000, you know. If you buy a whole cow, and the price of it, okay, prices today are pretty equivalent to prices then, although we have better manufacturing process, so they should be lower. So just multiply that, whatever it is, whatever your determinant is, your multiplier for, you know, inflation and other things, right? So the problem was, and people will say, in the Torah it says that the sacrifice is done by the bringer, the person, not the priest. The priest oversees it. In the Nehemiah and Ezra, in the Tanakh, it says that it's the priest. And they'll say, this is a contradiction. Is it a contradiction? No, it's not a contradiction. For example, who does the mikvah? Who does the baptism? The person. In Christianity, we have taken the point of a patriarchal mikvah. Who does the mikvah in Christianity? The pastor priest baptizes the person. John the Baptist most likely did not touch the person in any way. In the early church, they did not touch the person. The person literally baptized themselves, immersed themselves, because it was a mikvah. Why did it change? All right, here's your history, okay? It changed because what was the first question the church asked? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going down a rabbit track, but that's okay. These are really important questions. Why did the church change their habit of doing immersive mikvahs? That was one of the questions, was what does it have to be immersive? But before that, they asked this question. Does it have to meet the criteria of a mikvah? To meet the criteria of a mikvah, it had to be rainwater or water from certain rivers. Only the Jordan River, and there was another river that was applicable. But there were lots of rivers around. So the first question they ask is, can we baptize in any river? What do you think the church said? Some of the church said yes, and some said no. This was a problem. And then they asked the other question, because they had a problem. There are not a lot of rivers in some place in northern Africa. They had rainwater. And they said, well, can we use other sources than rainwater? And the church, most of the church said yes, some of the church said no. This was the fight. Remember, what did they say? Should Gentiles be circumcised or uncircumcised?
They have to follow the law.
This is where we're going to get to today, and this is a segue. Yes, sir.
Just while we're on the topic of meat sacrifices, was fish and poultry also considered to be meat, or was it just mammal?
Poultry was, but not fish. And this is really cool because in our Lenten view, right, of eating meat, that comes from the early papal, the Catholic view, right, that we accepted. But that early Catholic view came from the Jewish, well, not just the Jewish, from the Greek and the Roman view. The Greeks and the Romans and the Jews said that, well, fish was a problem to a degree for the Jews, right? Remember, they could eat scaly fish. But in the ancient cultures, fish was not considered an animal that required sacrifice. Now, did you offer it to the gods? I guess you didn't get sushi, and you had to go to the Far East to get sushi. Oh man, those gods were probably longing for it, right? Zeus and all those guys. But yeah, that's a great question because the poultry was, and you notice we already have that question of clean animals, right? So this is interesting too. Now I wanted to bring up something and I didn't put the things here. I looked this up just because I thought it was really interesting. And I should have used the correct word because it says in 2, let's see, this is 2, it's Genesis 6, 2. And this is one I mentioned last week, but I wanted to be clear on this. The sons of God, and the word is Elohim, which is gods. And the word is not Elohim as the same word that's used in Genesis 1. It's a form of Elohim that could be God or little g gods. What's even more interesting is the verb is plural. Now, the problem with the plural verb is, you notice, it's the sons of gods. So is the gods plural or the sons plural? Can't tell, because the language can't tell us. It goes on to talk about, the Nephilim on the earth in those days, and so afterwards, when the sons of God, Elohim, gods, went to the daughters of men and had children by them, they were the heroes of old men of renown. And I mentioned you, we have no myths or accounts of this in the Tanakh or Torah, not in the Talmud either. But I'll give you a further thing. I want you to be very clear on this. I hope I said it. I may not have said it. Why can there not be Nephilim, nor the King James Version giants, nor the sons of God, or gods, on the earth anymore? What happened between chapter 6 and chapter... So what happened to them? They're all gone. So this is a beautiful point of segue in two ways. When Caleb's friends claimed to see the sons of the Nephilim, what were they doing? They were exaggerating or they're lying on purpose because their response caused the children of Israel not to come.
We're
Now,
saying we saw people who were light or seemed light.
well, King James, yeah, that were like. I agree with that 100%. It doesn't show...
Metaphoric and all that.
What's that?
Oh, being, euphemistic and metaphoric and all that.
I'll go with that. See, I believe that the Bible should be looked at literally from the standpoint of Hebrew, not literally from the standpoint of English. So if you look at it, literally, can you still have euphemisms and allegory and other... Yeah, of course you can. That's the way the world is. That's the way we write. So the point is this. People will point out to you this contradiction if they're really smart. They'll say, well, they said they saw Nephilim, but there can't be Nephilim because there was a flood. What is this in Hebrew? This is it's a joke. It's even more than that. You're right. It is a metaphor and a euphemism, but even more than that, it's a joke. Every person who is an educated Torah, everybody memorized the Torah. All the men memorized the Torah, right? And the rabbis memorized the Tanakh. When this came up in the Torah, what would they say? The rabbi would point out to them if they didn't figure it out on their own. There can't be any Nephilim. And they'll go, ha, 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 ha. Right? They all knew that Caleb's friends were lying or exaggerating for the purpose of preventing God's will to be done.
Like scaring the people. They were trying to scare them. We can't go.
Like C-19, hysteria. Yeah, scare the people. So the point is that these are not contradictions. These are things that are self-evident within the text, that when we look at them, they give us information, right? We dig for the information. And so I think it's really, this is the critical point of this whole thing. So as we move into into Noah, and here's the most important part of the Noahic account. Oh, okay, I got to get to it. He built the ark, put the animals in it, they had the flood, and at the end of it, they came out of the flood, and that's the most important part I want to get to. All right. We talked about the sacrificial offerings, and I lost my notebook. Your notebook. All right. So he built it. Okay. So this is 8. Chapter 8. Chapter 8, floods happen. All the people that are alive, there's no Nephilims, there's no sons of God or women. There's all the animals, the ones that are left in the ark, according to our account. And it says, so Noah came out in 18, together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, and all the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground, and all the birds, everything that moves on the earth came out of the ark, one kind after another. Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and the clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings to him. That helps answer your question. It was poultry also. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, again will I curse the ground because of man, even though every inclination of his heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. So right now we are getting a covenant. This is a covenant, okay? He took, and I want to point out again, the mitzvah, okay? We are having a sacrificial point. Now, the sacrifice that Noah did, what did they do with the meat? They ate it. They ate it with the deity. Our view of sacrifice is perverted. We have a very strange view of sacrifice. We think sacrifice means taking the animals and burning them up so that they all go up to God in like a poof of smoke. But that is not at all what a sacrifice in the ancient world is. As a matter of fact, most of the sacrifices, and I don't want to start this yet, but we will get to the sacrifices, okay? We are building up. So we're gonna sit with this sacrifice. And I will tell you right now, just draw a line in the sand. There are no Holocaust sacrifices. There are no sacrifices at this moment where they burn up everything. They can't afford to. The sacrifices that are done at this point are all what we call Thanksgiving sacrifices. The Thanksgiving sacrifice is you take a the Thanksgiving sacrifice is always, in almost every culture, a percentage, usually a tithe. It's the tenth of it. We will see this as we get into the Torah and into the into the Mosaic covenant. We've got another covenant to go before we get there, but it's the preview. Okay? Did Noah kill all the clean animals he brought with him? There wouldn't be any clean animals left. He took a tithe. It is really important to notice this. Now, you notice they don't use the word tithe. Tithe means tenth. But they took, literally in the Greek, the term means the top of the heap. In the Greek, you have to use the tenth part. That's dekon. But there's another word in Greek which means the top of the heap. So in other cultures, when they gave a Thanksgiving sacrifice, and by the way, Noah's sacrifice is a?
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, what is he Thanksgiving for?
You saved us.
He saved us. God saved us. It is a Thanksgiving sacrifice. And you notice it's done, okay, in the ancient world, almost all sacrifices in other cultures were done. Why did you do a sacrifice in most cultures? Well, I can derive this. Okay, remember we have animism, we have pantheonic paganism, we have Mysterion, and we have Gnosticism. So we have pantheonic paganism going on, but we don't really have any, Mysterion going on. There's no Gnosticism. We have mostly animism. So the big deal with animism is it's not a Thanksgiving sacrifice. We'll go to animals, but let's start with fruits. So I have a fruit tree. A dryad lives in my fruit tree. The dryad provides the grapefruit. I go to the dryad and I take some of her fruit. What must I do? Give something in return so the dryad doesn't whack me. Yeah, it doesn't hurt me because it doesn't cause the tree to wither, right? Because it's not a Thanksgiving sacrifice, it's a sacrifice to placate the gods. Now, as I move into pantheonic paganism, you guys have read the Odyssey and the Iliad, right? Why did they do the sacrifices to the gods? There's two reasons. Well, keep them happy is kind of part of the second reason. The first reason was to find out what the gods wanted them to do. So they would cut open these animals and look at their guts. And the expert gut lookers, the priests, would say, yeah, this gut looks pretty good. Let's go attack. Or he would say, oh, this looks bad. No, we shouldn't go attack, right? Remember? That's in all of those documents. Go look at Herodotus. Look at Herodotus and, Homer's writing. Who's the other guy? Anyway, look at all those writings and you'll see this just clear as a bell. The other reason was not Thanksgiving, but to placate the gods for the purpose of gaining their favor.
Yeah,
Right? Matter of fact, go look at your Aristotle, look at your Socrates and Plato. Socrates, right up, this is a huge argument in, is it Euripides or in Socrates? One of the, I can't remember which one, I should remember all of them because they translate them. But anyway, in one of the great Socratic dialogues, the big argument is about gods. Do gods need to be placated? And the answer is no. The thing is that Noah's sacrifice is an opposite kind of sacrifice from the regular sacrifice of the ancient world. It's a thanksgiving sacrifice. And this is something that resonates through Torah. It resonates through Torah, which is very different than the other cultures. Most other cultures do not do a thanksgiving sacrifice. We start to see this thanksgiving sacrifice. Well, libations really aren't a thanksgiving sacrifice per se. They became such later, but whatever. We see this placation sacrifice because it comes out of animism into pantheonic paganism. So we can yak about that. But the big deal is, here we got Noah. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma. Why did he smell a pleasing aroma?
barbecue.
Yeah, it's barbecue. People get this wrong. It's not a Holocaust sacrifice.
That smells horrible.
Yeah, if I were to burn an animal, right? Anybody burn the hairs off a hog, right? After you slaughter it, right? Okay. Or the feathers off of a, yeah, you have a question?
Your
Well, I
own
was just
hair.
thinking, in the Greek parallel, isn't this the same thing as epithumia?
Thank you. Oh, you guys are great. This is wonderful. Yes, this is epithumia and macroepithumia. This is the scent of the sacrifice. The scent of the sacrifice is pleasing because, remember, Cain and Abel. Go back to Cain and Abel. God accepted Abel's sacrifice. It was a meat sacrifice, not burning up the flesh, not burning up the hide, not burning. It was cooking the meat. If anything, they burned the fat. Burning fat doesn't smell too badly. It depends on how you burn it, right? But burning meat is terrible. They were cooking the meat. Thus, the Lord smelled the epithumia. If this was Greek, okay, it would be epithumia. Which one is it? In Hebrew, it's the nikoet. No. It's the rach. Rach. It comes from the word ruach. So ruach hakodesh, right? The spirit. Yeah. In our spirit, the ruach hakodesh. It means to blow from ruach, literally, but it's the smell. So it's almost the exact opposite of to blow. But it's equal to the word of the ruach hakodesh, the Holy Spirit, right, as we translate it. But that scent, and he said in his heart. Now, God wasn't being placated. Yes, sir.
An obvious question is, there had to be more than one kind of, more than a pair of animals, groups of animals, where did the sacrifice come from? Newborns?
The
Extra
seven.
between.
Seven pairs.
Yeah. You
Yeah,
know,
if you're gonna reproduce, you're still gonna need
And that whole time they
Need
probably
more
had
than,
some babies.
more than one animal.
well, they bought 2 of each kind of the regular animals, and then they brought, 7 of the thing. Now, again, I'm not digging into the depths of interpreting or looking at what the Hebrew says on this subject. Okay? What did I tell you about numbers? Now, primary numbers and integers are pretty evident in these languages. But what's the problem with numbers? In the Torah, what is the ultimate problem with numbers? They're letters and they're consonants. The integers aren't too bad. So if it says 2, it's probably 2. But yet, in a euphemistic standpoint, 2 can be pairs of multiple pairs. It doesn't really specifically say in the Hebrew. If we were digging into it, you'd dig into it and you'd say, well, does it really say there were only 2 of each animal? You notice that the clean animals, they brought 7 pairs, right? And those pairs were meant for a sacrifice. Now, we know that the sacrifice is supposed to be a tithe. There weren't enough. Well, actually, there weren't. 14. See? interesting. So you could. So, and you don't need as many males as you do females in almost every animal category. So what I'm saying to you is, I believe literally we should look at what the Hebrew says. The Hebrew is very euphemistic. So if you want to dig deep on this, you need to really dig deep. I'm not going into it intentionally because I want to give more time to the covenants and the law, because that is the thing that I think, well, we could do a whole Torah class and take 5 years of doing it or more, right?
Right.
But I want to get to the law part, because the law part, when we talk about the New Testament, Noah is not as important in the New Testament concept as is the Noahic covenant. You see what I'm saying? I really want to get into the laws of these things, because the laws are what continue in Christ. The law and the covenants are what direct us to Christ. And if we understand the laws and the covenant, when we get to the Greeks and we get to the New Testament, we can suddenly go, ha, I understand, right? So that's what I'm trying to do. Now, at the same time, we go down rabbit tracks, which is okay. Rabbit holes, I don't mind going down rabbit holes, especially historical ones, because they help us comprehend. But like I said before, I would not get in a fight. Now, maybe you guys went to the Genesis class and you want to get into a fight, but I personally would not get in a fight up to 22. I think it's Genesis 22. Just because this is really hard to fight from a scientific and a historical legal standpoint, right? Why? No eyewitnesses. And that's, if you're facing a really good, astute combatant, that's the first thing they're going to tell you. Where's your eyewitnesses? How did this happen? And you better, if you don't have an answer, you're done. So that's why I think it's better to stick. Remember the paradigms? Tammy says that she doesn't like talking about the paradigms, but I think you have to talk about the paradigms. The legal paradigm and the Torah paradigm are the same for Jewish culture. So if you want to talk to a Jewish person, right, where do you stick? In the Torah Jewish paradigm, the legal paradigm. If you want to talk to a person, for example, in law school, it might be really good to stick in the legal paradigm, in the Torah paradigm. You can talk about the Noahic covenant. If you want to talk to most Gentiles, they have the limited information on the Bible at all because they don't teach it in the schools anymore hardly. So, you're gonna, when you do battle for the Spirit, and I'm talking in a pleasant way, right? The way Hebrews did. Hebrews said, talk to your neighbors about this. Ask them questions. So the questions you should ask, don't walk in and go, well, let's talk about Noah and the flood. Walk in and say, let's talk about the Noahic covenant. You're going to get a long ways further, in my opinion, with that than you will with Noah and the flood, because you're going to have some issues. You can bring out your Genesis stuff, that's cool. But like I said, the first thing they'll say is, where's your eyewitness? And if you say God, they'll say, well, I got my Bhagavad Gita right here. And then you're really in a world of hurt. So, in any case, the Noahic covenant is really important for a couple of reasons. We'll get to it, but you know why it's really important for two reasons? It applies to Gentiles. And who are Gentiles right at this moment we're talking about? Well, not just us. Noah and his sons are all Gentiles. So, God continues in 22, as long as the earth endures, seed time, harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. 9, then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall upon the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air and upon every creature that moves along the ground and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. What did he just do to clean animals? Yeah, no, you can clean animals, but unclean, there ain't none. He just said, everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, now I give you everything. But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood still in it. And for your lifeblood I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal, and from each man too. I will demand an accounting for the life of his fellow man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made man. As for you, be fruitful, increase in number, multiply on the earth, and increase upon it. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all the life be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is a sign of the covenant I am making between you and me and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign to the covenant between you and the earth, between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds upon the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures and every kind of the earth. So God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all the life on earth. And by the way, does this say that there was no rainbows before? No, it doesn't. It just says the rainbow is the sign that God indicated. Just like sacrifice is the sign of the Thanksgiving sacrifice to God that Noah did. Before God offered this covenant, Noah did a sacrifice. And you notice, what is a covenant? A bereave, a cutting, a sacrifice. We will find later that in Abraham, what did they do with the bodies? They chopped them in two and they walked between. God and Abraham walked between the animals, indicating that the sacrifice was accepted as a covenantal agreement. The big deal, this is also a euphemism. What is the euphemism of walking between animals that have been killed and cut? It's a buffet. It is literally a buffet. Again, we have our views of life. But guess what they did in the ancient world when they offered sacrifice? When you ate of the sacrifice, you ever wonder where the buffet table came from? You think it was an invention of man just to please man and to please your guests and to save money at the Marriott? No. Buffets were invented through the idea of the covenant. And the reason you place the food on the tables, and by the way, tables, you notice we do cheap buffets. I'm sorry. One table, right? But an actual buffet is supposed to be two. Not so you can select from both sides, but so you walk between the severed parts. Because theoretically, you're entering into a covenant. Buffets are very popular mostly at weddings. And it's not because they're money savers, it's because that's what you did. Right? There are indications of this covenant. So, God established a covenant. And you say, well, this covenant, what about the covenant? I've given you the points here. So, if you look at Genesis 9:9, the originator, the parties involved, 9:9, the reason, 9 through 10, the promise, 21 through 9:11, the sacrifice, the meal, the altar, the signs, the link, etc. But that's not what I really want to get to. The most important part isn't that. The most important part is the covenant. What is the covenant? And I also listed the covenant for you. This covenant is called the Noahic covenant. In a covenant, God, the deity, and the people enter into a covenant. So what did God... Okay, let's go back to the beginning a little bit. God told Adam in the first Adamic covenant to do one thing. Or not to do one thing. He told him, don't eat from the tree, and he did. Eve is not guilty. Adam is guilty. We go along. Is there any law right now? There's only one law. That is, don't eat from the tree, right? But God made it impossible because he cut him off from the Garden of Eden. So therefore, man is supposed to know the difference between good and evil. That was what was granted, right? What did he do? Evil. He did evil. So man is the problem. God said, well, I'm going to solve this problem. He croaked them all except for Noah. And then God said, I'm going to lay a covenant. A covenant always has laws. Now, God, in the second Adamic covenant, what did he tell them to do? Go back and look. Now, I'll tell you, he told them to conquer the earth, to take the earth and control it, to make the, to take, to subjugate the earth, right? That's that, and to fill it, to increase and fill it. That was his covenant, the second Adamic covenant. That was the law to do that. And then,
Sorry.
yeah.
That's in Genesis 1:28 already.
Yeah, read.
Well, that's not the second covenant. That's
Yeah.
the beginning on the sixth day.
No, I'm talking about the, okay, let's go back and look. We can look back. Let's see, I think I got that. There's a messianic promise. Okay. I don't have the complete thing. Because you listen to your wife, ate from the tree which I command you must not eat. You must not eat. Curses the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat of it all days of your life. You will produce thorns and thistles for you. You will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground. Since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and dust you will return. So God told them basically, what is the law? You are to work for your province. And by the way, as I told you, Abel kind of did the opposite. Even though God honored it, Abel became a shepherd, where Cain became a farmer, per se, right? Farming the ground. There's probably more in that. Did I miss something there? Do you see that, Ann? Do you have that?
No, I was just saying
Is there more in there?
that God did say that, but that was back in Genesis 1 before the fall.
Yeah, he had given them, that. But also he intended them to continue. So if we want to say there were two laws laid down, don't eat of the tree and take, conquer the earth, whatever. Submit. You have dominion over the earth, right? Right? Those were God's laws. So that was the thing that ultimately we have. But then in the second Adamic covenant, he basically laid it down, and it's not going to be easy. Apparently it was easy, right? In the Garden of Eden, it's always growing. I don't know, maybe they had little cherubim and seraphims, tilling the ground, right? But by the sweat of your brow, and also the thing about childbirth, which is really interesting. So we have the laws that God laid down, but he didn't lay down laws that we would have said, what would he have said about those laws? Those are, they're laws, but they're
not too bad.
Well, kind of, except, I'm not like this thorn thing, but it's you can kind of live with that. But the point was there any laws, real laws, like we would consider law? No. As a matter of fact, it was not illegal. The only thing is that God said you will know good from evil. So God expected man to know the difference between good and evil. So when Cain killed Abel, God wasn't happy because he should have known better, right? But God said after Noah, okay, look, God doesn't make mistakes. I know God doesn't make mistakes. But God sat down and he said, what do I have to do for these folks?
Tell them point blank.
I have to explain it to them. And, they got to get this. And so he did. And so you have the Noahic law. The Noahide law that this isn't mine. Look at Talmud. Look at the Talmud, the Sanhedrin 56a. Okay? So go pick up your Talmud. Maybe you can look it up on the internet. You can find it. But Talmud, Sanhedrin 56a, one of the earliest Talmudic documents, is about the Noahic covenant. Because there are 7 laws of Noah. There are 7 laws of Noah that God told man you must obey. And by the way, this applies, why this is so important is it applies to Gentiles. Are you guys Gentiles? I'm a Gentile. I'm not a Jewish guy. I am not under the Mosaic covenant. If you are in the Mosaic covenant, you got more problems, but we'll get to that. But the Noahic covenant says, number one, they call it, this is what they describe it as, the practice of equity. The practice of equity comes from, I don't know which exact verse it comes from. Let's see, it probably has it in here. The practice of equity means not lying or coveting. The rabbi said this was the first one. Let's see. He blessed Noah. He says, increase the number, fear and dread, la la la, fruitful, and I don't know where that comes from exactly, but it was that the rabbis say that the first part of the covenant is the practice of equity, and literally not lying or coveting. And when they say not lying, you know what they mean, right? If somebody asks you, does my hair look nice, and it looks really bad, you could say, yeah, it looks nice. But they're talking about bearing false witness in a legal court of law. So lying means that you are in a court of law and somebody asks you a question, or it would infect the other person in a negative fashion. That's lying. Or coveting. So the practice of equity. Second one is...
Sorry to interrupt. I don't quite understand where that comes from.
Yeah, let me look at it. I got my notes right here. Let's see. I got it. I got it right here.
The first thing the Lord tells them is going out from the ark and the wife of your sons' wives, and they're all living creatures, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah, let me see. I'll find it. I got my notes right here from the Talmudic thing. So, okay. Okay, my notes aren't saying as strongly as I wanted to. I could read you my notes, but I don't think that's worthwhile. The notes are specifically from a Messianic Jewish standpoint, too, so they kind of presume it. Let's see. Covenant. This is what my notes say from the Talmudic things. It says, okay, first of the covenant is made between God and Noah and his sons. It's God's covenant of righteousness by faith, with the acceptance of Noah and the generations to perform the will of God and keep the Noahic commandments. The relationship is what I must do to show my faith and obey God. This is from Messianic Jewish standpoint. God answers first by blessing Noah and his sons. Noah and his sons and all the generations be blessed by keeping this commandment. The true worshipers of God from all generations forward are keepers of this covenant. So therefore, in the fact that it calls for them to be worshipers of Jehovah, therefore, Talmudic sources would say that is blaspheming the name. That includes blaspheming the name and the practice of equity. So in other words, because of it's calling you to obey Jehovah, right? That immediately pronounces the point of blaspheming the name. And when they say blaspheming the name of God is not yet known, right? So it means that to be a worshiper, for a Gentile to be a proper worshiper, they must acknowledge the God, right? That's the first part of that. The second part of that, according to my Talmudic sources, is that establishes the point of equity. And also the other point of equity is God establishes the marriage laws of being fruitful and replenishing the earth. Within his commandment, according to the Talmudic sources, it's responsibility to live a life of sanctity apart from adultery, as well as to have children. And this guy goes into a little thing about, the Greek and the porneia in Acts. But anyway, it talks about adultery as a commandment within the covenant. The Jews always understand what the scholars had employed, thou shalt not covet. In other words, and that thou shalt not steal are contained within that commandment. Both coveting and stealing would be those indications that coveting and stealing relate to the family and to children. That's Talmudic sources. I'm not disagreeing
This
with
seems like quite a stretch because none of this is really mentioned. It seems to me, at least just reading.
Well, if you read it, actually, I think it's pretty close, because if you read it, God blessed Noah and his son, saying, and be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and dread will fall upon all the beasts of the earth, etc., for you. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you, just like I give you green plants. And then it says, you must not eat meat with its lifeblood in it. That's pretty clear, and we'll see that that's in
That's
the,
clear.
that's the thing. And for your lifeblood, I will surely demand an accounting. In other words, if you kill another person,
Murdering, that's clear.
homicide, I will demand an accounting from every animal, from each man. I will demand an accounting for life of fellow man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. In the image of God has God made man. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it. Part of the reason, and really, what I should do, but I'm not going to do it. What I should do is I should dig into this really deeply into the Hebrew. Because what are we obviously missing from the Hebrew? The Talmudic scholars pull out of this. Pull out of this is not the right word. The Hebraic scholars see within this the euphemistic concepts of the practice of equity that they call not lying or coveting, and also not blaspheming the name or making of graven images, nor sexual adultery, immorality. Bloodshed is obvious. Robbery, they see all this, right? They see that within the context. And the reason I think that's true, or the reason I think that, and like I said, I should probably dig completely into this, but I suspect the point of, for example, when it says sheds the blood of man, and that God is the image of God, has man made him, what do you think that would directly allude to within a Hebraic culture? Not just the man himself, but what of the man? His possessions, his family, right? So to us, when we see these words, they seem very specific and contextual. It's because we're Greek thinkers, and we've gotten this. We didn't get this from the Greek; we got it from the Hebrew. But the problem with that is we are trying to make this explain for modern readers in English, right? And so, like I said, what I should probably do, maybe in the next class, or maybe I don't know. I don't want to really. That will take me probably a week to dig into this to get to that point. But
Where is eating limb torn from a live animal? That's pretty specific, and I don't see that anywhere.
yeah, you must not eat meat that has a lifeblood still in it. And the reason that was a point, okay, now a lot of this too, for example, the whole concept of the clean and unclean animals. Well, where did that come from?
How do they know? Or like blaspheming the name, they don't even know what.
The name is.
So I feel like you're reading stuff into it that just can't even be there.
Well, if you look at it the way we are looking at it, which I think is the proper way to look at it from a historical standpoint as we're moving forward, but what are the Talmudic scholars looking at it as? And now we're going to get to this too. They're looking at the Torah as a whole, right? They're looking at the Torah as a whole. And so when they look at the Torah as a whole, remember I told you part of our study is what did the Jews, that's our whole study. What do the Jews think about their own writing? I'm telling you what they think about their own writing. In Talmud, Sanhedrin 56a, it mentions the Noahic covenant and says these are the Noahic laws. So they say the practice of equity, not lying or coveting, blaspheming the name of the Lord in vain, which, by the way, we know it hasn't happened yet, right? Idolatry, making graven images, because you have to only obey the God. Sexual immorality, which is kind of obvious in there. Bloodshed, murder, robbery is not as obvious, although I think it's contextual. And eating a limb torn from a live animal. Part of the point in this is culturally, one of the things that these ancient cultures did is, for example, we know this is a fact. They would literally rip the limbs off of animals to in sacrifice. Yeah, it's kind of gross, right? But, you know, a part of that is, I guess, cruelty of their culture or whatever. That's something they did. So part of it is, what do you call it, cultural codes that we are seeing the Talmud or the Talmudic scholars exposing. The part of the point here is, remember I said this applies directly to the New Testament. We're Gentiles, so number one, I advise you, talk to your rabbi about it, but I would advise you as Gentiles to follow the Noahic covenant. If you're not following the Noahic covenant, you're going to have problems. Now later on, we will get to the Mosaic covenant, which will be more specific. And by the way, almost all of our churches agree that we should hold to the Mosaic covenant, so we don't. What's the day? Did you guys not turn on any lights on the Shabbat? I was turning on lights and turning off lights. I was even driving on Shabbat. I'd be in real trouble if my rabbi caught me, right? So we don't follow the Mosaic covenant. And by the way, I'll mention this too, because I think this is really important. If you go look at, let's see, Acts. I thought I had a copy of it in here. Where's Acts? Where's the part about in Acts where it says what the Gentiles should do? Yeah, you got that right in front of you? I thought I had this right in my notes. Can you read that? Where they ask, what are the Gentiles? It's Acts 21:25. All right? Is that right? No, maybe that's not right.
Well, like in the Jerusalem Council, but some.
Yeah, the
believers
Council of
belong to the
Jerusalem, where
party
they
of
told them
Judah.
what to do, right?
Yeah, some
It's-
believers who belong to the party of the Pharisees rose up and said, it is necessary to circumcise them and to order them to keep the law of Moses.
And what did they say to do?
The apostles and the elders were gathered together to consider this matter. After there had been much debate, Peter stood up and said to them, do you want me to read the whole thing? But let's
Read it where it says what they told them to do.
And it says, now therefore, why are you putting God to the test by placing yoke on the neck of the disciples that neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear? But we believe that we will be saved through the grace of the Lord Jesus, just as they will. And it says,
Don't you read?
therefore my judgment is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who come to God, but should write to them to abstain from the things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, and from what has been strangled, and from blood. For from ancient generations Moses has had in every city those who proclaim.
You are to abstain from food sacrificed to idols, and blood from meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. You will do all the holy things.
And what the Messianic Jews, and by the way, the early church believed is, and that's a whole other study, but what they believed was this related directly to the Noahic covenant. And if you look at the verbiage in the Noahic covenant, or in the Torah itself about the Noahic covenant, and you compare that to the verbiage in Acts, it says, for example, you know, everything that lives and moves food to you, you must not eat meat that has a lifeblood still in it. Your lifeblood demand an accounting. And whoever says what they were doing, remember I told you that we see synopsis body? Just by reflecting what they did in the Jerusalem Council about the Gentiles, that's a synopsis. They would call that a synopsis of the law of Noah, the Noahic covenant. Now you say, where'd you get all this stuff? And I'm like, I got it from the Talmud, from the Jewish rabbis, what they agreed, right? And I'm not ready at this point in time to go through the Talmudic documents and to try to explain to you. Remember how they get to these points? How do they get these points? sit around and discuss it for ages, right? And they record it in their documents. So you may not even get their full discussion. What you're going to get is their conclusions. And so their conclusions are that the Noahic covenant says this: acts of equity, blaspheming the name, idolatry, sexual immorality, bloodshed, robbery. And when the Jerusalem council told the Gentiles what to do, their first comment was basically to follow the Noahide laws. And second, what did they tell them? In every synagogue in the empire, basically, you can hear Moses and the Mosaic covenant being read and expressed. In other words, what were they supposed to do? They were supposed to follow the Noahic covenant, but then they were also supposed to learn the Jewish Mosaic covenant. And by the way, all of that is in the Torah. So all I'm showing you is this is, as we move up, now God has given a set of laws to the people. And according to the Jewish scholars, that set of laws includes everything except 2 points: the Shabbat, the Sabbath day, and honor your father and mother. That doesn't mean you should go home and not honor your father and mother, and you don't tell your kids to do that either. But the big deal is that, isn't it interesting that we get, finally, God says, here you go, bang. And however you want to interpret this, and I personally think the rabbinic interpretation is probably the most correct. You know, I don't know if I want to even dig into this so deep, because we can get there, but getting there may take a while. So I'm just going to set it out for you. Here's the Noahide covenant. You know, be convinced of it or not be convinced of it. I don't think you need to have faith in it, but it certainly was what the early church wanted us as Gentiles to follow.